When Christmas Eve ended with her fiancé's betrayal in a crowded Manhattan restaurant, Lena Hart walked out into the snow with nothing. No ring, no future, no idea who she'd become without him. But sometimes the worst night of your life is just the beginning. One chance encounter with a stranger in a bar, one dangerous invitation, one choice that would drag her into a world of power, violence, and impossible loyalty, where love meant survival and safety was the biggest lie of all. This is the story of how Lena Hart lost everything safe and found everything real. If you're ready to hear how one broken heart led to the most dangerous love of all, stay with me until the end. And if this story speaks to you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Parcheet. The restaurant was all wrong for a breakup. Crystal chandeliers caught the candlelight and scattered it across white tablecloths like fallen stars. Soft piano music drifted through the warmth of expensive perfume and aged wine, mixing with the gentle murmur of conversations about vacations in Aspen and stock portfolios and where to spend New Year's Eve. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered under fresh snow, every surface touched with that particular magic that only existed on Christmas Eve, when the whole city seemed to hold its breath and believe in something bigger than itself. Lena Hart sat across from her fiancé of 3 years and watched her entire future dissolve in real time. "I'm sorry," Derek said again, his voice low and careful, like he was explaining a difficult business decision to a disappointing client. "I know the timing is terrible, but I can't keep pretending." Pretending. The word hit like a physical blow. Lena's hands were folded in her lap, perfectly still, because if she moved them, she wasn't sure what they'd do. Reach for him? Slap him? Knock over the wine glass that still held the Cabernet he'd ordered because he knew it was her favorite, back when knowing her favorite things had mattered to him? "How long?" Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Steadier than she felt. Derek's jaw tightened. He was handsome in that careful, cultivated way that came from expensive haircuts and a personal trainer and teeth whitened just enough to look natural. Everything about him was measured, controlled. Even breaking her heart in public on the most sentimental night of the year, was calculated to minimize his discomfort. "Does it matter?" "Yes." Lena lifted her chin, meeting his eyes. "It matters to me." He sighed, glancing around the restaurant like he was hoping for an interruption that wouldn't come. Then he looked back at her, and there was something almost relieved in his expression, like he'd been waiting for permission to stop pretending he cared about her feelings. "Since August." August. 4 months. 4 months of kisses that meant nothing. 4 months of waking up beside him, making coffee, talking about wedding venues and honeymoon destinations, and whether they should get a dog after they moved into the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights that his parents were helping them buy. 4 months of planning a future with a man who'd already decided she wouldn't be in his. "Is there someone else?" The question tasted like ash. Derek shifted in his seat. "Lena, just answer the question, Derek." "Yes." He said it quietly, but without shame. "Her name is Vanessa. She's a colleague. We didn't plan for it to happen, but—" "Don't!" Lena held up one hand, sharp enough that he stopped mid-sentence. "Don't tell me it just happened. Don't tell me you couldn't help it. You made a choice. You've been making it for 4 months while I was picking out china patterns and arguing with your mother about the guest list and defending you to my friends when they said you were too distant, too cold, too focused on your career to be a good husband." Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or annoyance that she was making this harder than he'd expected. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Then you should have been honest in August." Lena's voice cracked on the last word, and she hated herself for it. Hated that even now, sitting across from the man who'd just demolished 3 years of her life, she still cared what he thought, still wanted him to see her pain and feel something. But Derek just looked tired. "You're right, I should have. I'm sorry, Lena. You deserve better than this." The apology was worse than the betrayal. It was so reasonable, so calm, like he was apologizing for being late to dinner or forgetting her birthday, not for systematically dismantling every plan they'd made together while sleeping with someone else. Lena stood up. The movement was abrupt enough that the couple at the next table glanced over, curiosity flickering across their faces before politeness drew their attention back to their own perfect Christmas Eve. "Lena, wait!" Derek reached for her hand, but she pulled away before he could touch her. For what? So you can finish explaining how this is all very sad, but ultimately for the best? So you can tell me we'll stay friends? She grabbed her coat from the back of her chair, her hands shaking now, everything shaking. I hope Vanessa makes you happy, Derek. I really do. Because if you threw away 3 years for someone who doesn't, then you're even more of a coward than I thought. She walked away before he could respond. Walked through the restaurant with her head high and her vision blurring, past tables full of couples holding hands and families laughing, and a little girl in a velvet dress pointing excitedly at the snow outside. Walked past the maitre d', who started to ask if everything was all right, then thought better of it when he saw her face. The cold hit her like a wall when she stepped outside. Christmas Eve in Manhattan was supposed to be magical. That's what all the movies said, all the songs, all the stories about finding love under twinkling lights and making wishes on the first snow. But standing on the sidewalk outside a restaurant where her future had just ended, Lena felt nothing but the brutal, indifferent cold of a city that didn't care about broken hearts or shattered plans or the fact that she had nowhere to go and no one to call who wouldn't say "I told you so" with their eyes, even if their mouths stayed kind. Her apartment was Derek's apartment first. They'd moved in together 2 years ago, into his sleek modern space in Tribeca with the exposed brick and the view of the river. All her things were there. Her clothes, her books, the vintage typewriter her grandmother had left her that sat on the shelf above the desk, where she sometimes worked late into the night on marketing campaigns that felt increasingly meaningless. She could go back there. Derek was here, probably still sitting at that table, probably texting Vanessa right now to tell her it was done, finally done, and they could stop sneaking around. Lena could go back to the apartment and pack a bag and call her sister in Boston and figure out what came next. But the thought of walking into that space, surrounded by the ghost of the life they'd built together, made her stomach turn. So she started walking instead. The snow was falling harder now, soft and thick, muffling the usual chaos of the city. Taxis cruised past with their lights on, looking for last-minute fares heading to holiday parties or late-night church services. Store windows glowed with garlands and gold ribbon, and mannequins dressed in clothes Lena couldn't afford anymore now that she wouldn't be splitting rent with Derek. Street musicians played carols on corners, their instrument cases open for tips from people feeling generous in the spirit of the season. Lena walked past all of it, her heels clicking on the snowy pavement, her coat pulled tight even though the cold was already seeping through the wool. She walked without direction, without purpose, just moving because standing still meant thinking and thinking meant feeling, and she wasn't ready to feel this yet. Wasn't ready to admit that she'd wasted 3 years loving someone who'd never loved her back the same way. Wasn't ready to face the looks from friends who'd warned her, family who'd questioned whether Derek was really the one, colleagues who'd noticed how often she made excuses for why he couldn't make it to company events. Wasn't ready to admit they'd all been right. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, saw Derek's name on the screen, and declined the call without reading whatever message he'd sent. Then she turned the phone off completely and shoved it back in her pocket. By the time she looked up, she'd wandered into Midtown. The streets here were busier, full of tourists taking photos in front of decorated storefronts and families heading to Rockefeller Center to see the tree one more time before Christmas morning. The crowd pressed around her, all of them wrapped up in their own joy, their own traditions, their own perfect holiday moments. Lena had never felt more alone. A bar appeared on her left, tucked between a closed boutique and a coffee shop that was somehow still open despite the late hour. The sign above the door was simple, almost invisible: The Bishop's Gambit. The windows were tinted dark, and warm light spilled out onto the snow whenever the door opened to let someone in or out. It wasn't the kind of place Lena would normally choose. Too dark, too unfamiliar, too far from the carefully curated wine bars Derek preferred, where everyone knew the bartender's name, and the cocktail menu changed seasonally, and the background music was always just loud enough to seem sophisticated without making conversation difficult. But Derek wasn't here. And maybe that was exactly why Lena pushed open the door and stepped inside. The warmth hit her first, thick with the smell of old wood and bourbon and something cooking in a kitchen she couldn't see. The bar was long and made of dark mahogany that gleamed under dim pendant lights. Bottles arranged on shelves behind it like a library of liquid forgetting. Small tables filled the space, most of them occupied by people who looked like they'd been there for hours and planned to stay for several more. It was the kind of bar where people came to disappear. Lena made her way to an empty stool near the end of the bar, shrugging out of her coat and draping it over the seat beside her. The bartender, a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled into a bun and eyes that had seen everything twice, nodded at her. "What can I get you?" "Whiskey," Lena said. Then, because tonight called for honesty even if nothing else did, she added, "The good kind, and make it a double." The bartender's mouth quirked. "Rough night?" "You could say that. Christmas Eve usually is for some people." She poured the whiskey with practiced efficiency, sliding the glass across the bar. "This one's on the house. Merry Christmas." Lena almost laughed at that, but it came out as something closer to a sob, so she grabbed the glass and drank instead. The whiskey burned going down, sharp and real, the first thing all night that felt honest. She was halfway through her second drink when she felt someone watching her. It wasn't a creepy feeling, not the uncomfortable awareness of unwanted attention that every woman learned to recognize by the time she was 20. This was different, deliberate. Like whoever was looking at her had decided she was worth their focus and wasn't trying to hide it. Lena turned her head and found him. He was sitting 3 stools down, one elbow resting on the bar, his body angled toward her like he'd been waiting for her to notice. Dark hair, dark eyes, a face that was all sharp angles and shadows in the low light. He wore a black suit that fit too perfectly to be anything but custom-made, the kind of tailoring that whispered money without shouting it. A glass of something amber sat in front of him, untouched, and he was watching her with an intensity that should have been unsettling but somehow wasn't. "Bad night?" he asked, his voice low and smooth, carrying easily over the quiet conversations around them. Lena lifted her glass. "What gave it away?" "The way you walked in, like you were running from something." "Maybe I am." He smiled, just a slight curve of his mouth that didn't reach his eyes. "Then you picked the right place. Nobody finds you here unless you want to be found." There was something about him that set off every warning bell her mother had installed in her head about talking to strangers in bars. Something dangerous in the way he held himself, the way he watched her, the way he seemed completely comfortable in his own skin in a way that suggested he was comfortable anywhere. Lena should have looked away, should have finished her drink and left, found a hotel, called her sister, done any of the responsible things a 30-year-old professional woman was supposed to do when her life fell apart. Instead, she met his eyes and asked, "Are you trying to find me?" "No." He picked up his glass, considered it, set it back down without drinking. "But I'm not trying to avoid you either." "That's cryptic." "That's honest." Lena studied him, this stranger who talked like he'd thought very carefully about every word before he said it. "Do you always talk to women alone at bars on Christmas Eve?" "Only the ones who look like they're about to make a decision they'll regret." "And what decision is that?" "Whether to have another drink or go back to wherever you came from." His eyes didn't leave hers. "For what it's worth, I think you should have another drink." "Why?" "Because going back means facing whatever you're running from, and you don't look ready for that yet." He was right, and Lena hated that he was right. Hated that this stranger could read her so easily when Derek had spent 3 years completely misunderstanding who she was. "What makes you think I'm running from anything?" she asked. "The mascara." He gestured vaguely toward her face. "You fixed it in the bathroom, but you missed a spot. Right there." He touched his own cheek just below his eye. Lena's hand flew to her face, fingers finding the smudge of makeup she'd thought she'd cleaned away. Heat rushed to her cheeks, embarrassment mixing with anger, mixing with something else she couldn't name. "You're very observant," she said tightly. "Occupational hazard." "What occupation is that?" He smiled again, and this time it almost reached his eyes. "The kind where paying attention keeps you alive." That should have scared her, should have sent her running out into the snow, back to safety, back to the life she knew how to navigate, even if it had just blown up in her face. But Lena was tired of being scared. Tired of playing it safe. Tired of building her life around what other people expected instead of what she wanted. "I'm Lena," she heard herself say. The stranger tilted his head slightly, like he was deciding whether to give her his real name or a convenient lie. Then he said, "Marco." "Nice to meet you, Marco." "Is it?" I don't know yet." Lena finished her drink and set the glass down with more force than necessary. "But I'm about to find out." Marco's expression shifted, something that might have been surprise or might have been approval flickering across his features. He stood, and Lena realized he was taller than she'd thought, built like someone who knew how to move, how to fight, how to take up space without asking permission. "Have dinner with me," he said. Not a question. An invitation that sounded like a challenge. Every rational thought Lena had left screamed at her to say no. She didn't know this man. Didn't know where he'd take her, or what he wanted, or whether she'd be safe. Everything about him suggested danger, from the way he moved to the way he watched her to the casual confidence that said he was used to getting what he wanted. But sitting in this bar, running from a broken engagement and a hollow future, Lena realized she didn't want rational anymore. Didn't want safe. Didn't want to go back to the apartment she'd shared with a man who'd been pretending to love her while planning his exit strategy. She wanted something real, even if real meant reckless, even if real meant dangerous. "Okay," Lena said, and slid off her bar stool. Marco's eyes darkened with something that looked like satisfaction. He pulled out his phone, typed a quick message, then pocketed it and offered her his arm. "Where are we going?" Lena asked as she took it, the fabric of his suit jacket expensive under her fingers. "Somewhere quieter." He guided her toward the door, his hand settling at the small of her back in a way that felt both protective and possessive. "Somewhere we can talk without interruption." "Should I be worried?" Marco looked down at her, and for a moment his expression was completely open, completely honest. "Yes," he said, "you probably should be." Then he smiled, opened the door, and led her out into the snow. A car was waiting at the curb. Not a taxi, not an Uber. A black Mercedes with tinted windows and a driver who climbed out as soon as he saw Marco approaching. The driver was older, maybe 60, with the kind of face that had seen violence and accepted it as part of the landscape. He opened the back door without a word. Marco gestured for Lena to get in first. She hesitated for just a second, one last chance to change her mind, to walk away, to choose safety over curiosity. Then she ducked into the car. The interior was all leather and dark wood and the faint scent of cigars. Marco slid in beside her and the driver closed the door, sealing them into a space that felt both intimate and isolated from the rest of the world. "Where to, Mr. DeLuca?" the driver asked. "Home," Marco said simply. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding through the snowy streets with the kind of smooth confidence that came from a vehicle worth more than most people's houses. Lena watched the city blur past the windows, lights and snow and strangers all blending together into something that felt like a dream. "You're taking me to your house?" she asked. "Is that a problem?" "I don't know. Should it be?" Marco turned to look at her, his eyes catching the streetlights as they passed under them. "That depends on whether you trust me." "I don't know you." "True." He shifted slightly, angling his body toward hers. "But you got in the car anyway. So either you're very brave or very reckless. Or very tired of making safe choices that lead to terrible outcomes." Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or respect. "What happened tonight, Lena?" She could have lied, could have deflected, made a joke, changed the subject. But there was something about the way he asked, the way he was looking at her, that made her want to tell the truth. "My fiancé ended our engagement," she said quietly, "on Christmas Eve, in a restaurant full of people having the best night of their lives, while mine fell apart over a $30 glass of wine and an apology that didn't mean anything." Marco didn't offer sympathy, didn't tell her she was better off without him, or that everything happened for a reason, or any of the other empty platitudes people said when they didn't know what else to offer. He just said, "He's a fool." "You don't know that. You don't know me. Maybe I'm terrible. Maybe I deserved it." "Did you?" Lena thought about Derek, about the way she'd bent herself into shapes that fit his expectations, ignored her own needs to accommodate his schedule, defended his coldness as focus and his distance as ambition. Thought about how she'd convinced herself that love was supposed to be work, that relationships required sacrifice, that wanting more was selfish. "No," she said finally. "I didn't deserve it." "Then he's a fool," Marco repeated. "And you're better off knowing now than finding out after the wedding. That's what everyone will say." "Are they wrong?" "No." Lena let her head fall back against the seat, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "But it doesn't make it hurt less?" "It shouldn't." Marco's voice was quiet, almost gentle. If it didn't hurt, it wouldn't have been real. And pretending it didn't matter would be worse than admitting it did. Lena turned to look at him, the stranger who somehow understood what she needed to hear better than anyone she actually knew. "Why are you being so nice to me?" "I'm not being nice." His mouth quirked. "I'm being honest. There's a difference." "Most people can't tell the difference. Most people are liars." The car slowed, then stopped. Lena glanced out the window and saw gates, tall, iron, expensive, swinging open to let them through. Beyond them, a driveway curved through manicured grounds toward a house that looked more like a fortress than a home. Her heart started beating faster. "Marco," she said carefully, "what do you do?" He met her eyes, and there was no smile now, no softness, just that same intense focus that had drawn her attention in the bar. "I protect people," he said. "I build things. I make sure the people who work for me and the people who depend on me are safe." He paused. "And sometimes I eliminate threats." It wasn't an answer. It was a warning. The car stopped in front of the house. The driver opened Marco's door, then walked around to open Lena's. She didn't move. "Last chance," Marco said quietly. "If you want to leave, I'll have him take you anywhere you want to go. No questions asked." Lena looked at the house, then at Marco, then back at the house. Every instinct her parents had given her, every lesson she'd learned about stranger danger and trusting her gut and not taking risks with men she didn't know, screamed at her to get out of this car and go back to her life. But her life was Derek's apartment and Derek's friends and Derek's carefully planned future that didn't include her anymore. Her life was safe and predictable and had just proven that safe didn't mean protected and predictable didn't mean honest. Marco was offering something different, something that scared her and thrilled her, and felt more real than anything had in years. Lena got out of the car. Marco followed, and together they walked up the steps to massive double doors that opened before he could reach for them. A man stood in the entrance, younger than the driver, built like he spent most of his life in a gym, wearing a suit that barely contained the muscles underneath. "Mr. DeLuca," he said with a slight nod. "Tony. We won't be disturbed tonight." "Understood." Marco led Lena inside, past Tony, and into a foyer that was all marble and dark wood and artwork that probably cost more than she made in a year. A staircase curved up to a second floor she couldn't see, and doors branched off in multiple directions, all of them closed. "This way," Marco said, guiding her down a hallway to the right. They ended up in a dining room that was somehow both grand and intimate, dominated by a table that could have seated 20 but was set for 2. Candles were already lit, casting warm light across crystal glasses and china that looked antique and probably was. "When did you arrange this?" Lena asked, turning to face him. "When we were at the bar." Marco shrugged out of his jacket, draping it over the back of a chair. "I told you, I pay attention." "This is insane." "Probably." He pulled out a chair for her. "Are you going to sit, or are you going to keep telling me how crazy this is while standing in the doorway?" Lena sat. Marco took the seat across from her, and within minutes, someone Lena hadn't even seen appeared with wine and plates of food that looked like it had been prepared by a professional chef who'd trained in Paris and charged accordingly. They ate, they talked. And somewhere between the second course and the third glass of wine, Lena stopped being scared and started being curious. Marco told her about growing up in Brooklyn, about learning early that the world was divided into people who took what they wanted and people who let it be taken. He told her about building something from nothing, about loyalty and betrayal, about the difference between power and violence, and why most people didn't understand that one could exist without the other. He didn't tell her exactly what he did, but Lena was smart enough to read between the lines, to understand that the protection he offered came with a cost, that the threats he eliminated weren't handled through lawyers and lawsuits and strongly worded letters. Marco DeLuca was dangerous. That much was clear. What wasn't clear was why that didn't send her running. "Your turn," Marco said, refilling her wine glass. "Tell me something real, Lena. Not the story you tell people at parties. Something true." Lena considered that, the weight of his attention on her like a physical thing. Then she said, "I spent 3 years building a life I thought I wanted because I was too scared to admit I was building it for someone else. I convinced myself that being chosen was the same thing as being loved. And tonight, when it all fell apart, the worst part wasn't losing him. She met Marco's eyes. The worst part was realizing I'd lost myself first, and I didn't even notice. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. "And now?" Marco asked quietly. "Now I don't know who I am anymore." Lena's voice cracked. "I don't know what I want or where I'm going or how to start over when everything I built my life around was a lie." Marco leaned back in his chair, watching her with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense she'd ever built. "Then don't start over," he said. "Start new." "What's the difference?" "Starting over means going back to who you were before. Starting new means becoming someone you've never been." He paused. "Someone you choose to be instead of someone circumstances made you." Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of this man who was somehow both a stranger and the most honest person she'd talked to in years. "I don't know how to do that," she whispered. Marco stood and walked around the table, offering her his hand. When she took it, he pulled her to her feet, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, smell the faint scent of cologne and something else, something that was just him. "Yes," he said quietly, "you do. You already started when you walked out of that restaurant tonight instead of trying to fix something that was already broken. You took the next step when you got in my car, even though you knew it was dangerous." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "You're braver than you think, Lena Hart. You just need to stop apologizing for it." She should have pulled away. Should have thanked him for dinner and asked to be taken to a hotel and figured out her life like a responsible adult. Instead, she stepped closer. Marco's free hand came up to cup her face, tilting her chin up so she had no choice but to meet his eyes. "This is where you make another choice," he said. "You can leave right now. I'll have someone drive you anywhere you want to go, and we'll never see each other again. Or what?" His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Or you can stay. See where this goes. Stop running from what scares you and start running toward what you want." "I don't even know what I want anymore." "Then figure it out." His voice dropped lower. "But do it here. With me. For tonight, at least." It was reckless. Insane. Everything Lena had spent her life avoiding because risks meant failure, and failure meant disappointment, and she'd built her entire identity around never disappointing anyone. But disappointing everyone had gotten her a fiancé who stopped loving her somewhere between summer and Christmas and never bothered to mention it. Playing it safe had gotten her exactly nowhere. So Lena made a choice. She kissed him. Marco responded immediately, his hand sliding into her hair, pulling her closer as he took control of the kiss with the same confidence he brought to everything else. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't sweet. It was demanding and possessive and lit something in Lena's chest that had been dormant so long she'd forgotten it existed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said. Not a question, a request that sounded like a command. And Lena, who'd spent 3 years saying yes to all the wrong things, finally said yes to something that felt terrifyingly right. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." Lena woke to unfamiliar light streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The ceiling was too high, the sheets too soft, the silence too complete. Then it all came rushing back. Derek's face across the restaurant table, the cold walk through Manhattan, the bar where she'd met a stranger who'd looked at her like he could see straight through every lie she'd ever told herself. Marco. She turned her head on the pillow and found the other side of the bed empty, the sheets cool to the touch. He'd been gone for a while then, long enough that whatever heat his body had left behind had faded into nothing. Lena sat up slowly, taking in the bedroom that was easily twice the size of the one she'd shared with Derek. The furniture was all dark wood and clean lines, expensive without being ostentatious. A sitting area occupied one corner, 2 leather chairs facing a fireplace that probably worked. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over grounds that stretched far enough to make her wonder exactly how much land Marco owned in a city where every square foot cost a fortune. Her dress from last night was draped over a chair, her shoes placed neatly beside it. Someone had brought them up while she slept. The thought should have been disturbing, strangers entering the room, moving around her unconscious body, but somehow it wasn't. Marco's world operated by different rules, and she was starting to understand that those rules included a level of service and discretion that wealthy people took for granted and everyone else found unsettling. A knock at the door made her pull the sheet higher. "Come in," she called, her voice still rough with sleep. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s, dressed in simple black pants and a white blouse, carrying a tray that smelled like coffee and something baked and buttery. "Good morning, Miss Hart," the woman said with a professional smile. "Mr. DeLuca thought you might be hungry. I'm Marie, the housekeeper." "Thank you," Lena said, accepting the tray as Marie set it across her lap. Coffee, fresh fruit, croissants that were still warm, and what looked like eggs Benedict prepared by someone who actually knew what they were doing. This is very kind. Mr. DeLuca left instructions that you were to have anything you needed." Marie moved to the windows, adjusting the curtains to let in more light. "He's in a meeting this morning, but asked me to tell you he'll join you for lunch at 1 o'clock, if that suits you." A meeting on Christmas Day. Lena tried to imagine what kind of business demanded attention on a holiday and came up with answers that all pointed in the same dark direction. "That's fine," she heard herself say. "Thank you, Marie." Marie nodded and headed for the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "There are clothes in the closet, miss. Mr. DeLuca had some things brought in this morning. He wasn't sure of your size, so there's a selection. If nothing fits or if you need anything else, just use the phone on the nightstand. Extension 7. Then she was gone, leaving Lena alone with her breakfast and 100 questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. She ate slowly, letting the coffee chase away the fog of sleep and the memory of wine that had tasted too good and gone down too easy. Through the windows, she could see parts of the estate, manicured lawns, a fountain, what looked like a greenhouse in the distance. No neighbors visible anywhere, just trees and walls and the kind of privacy that money could buy when you had enough of it. When she finished eating, Lena set the tray aside and went to investigate the closet Marie had mentioned. It was actually a dressing room, complete with a vanity and mirror and enough space to park a car. And hanging on the racks were clothes, easily 24 outfits ranging from casual jeans and sweaters to dresses that probably cost more than her monthly rent. All of them in her size, or close enough. All of them with the tags still on from stores she recognized but rarely shopped at because her marketing executive's salary didn't stretch to designers whose names she could barely pronounce. Marco had done this, had somehow figured out her size and her style, and arranged for an entire wardrobe to appear overnight on Christmas morning when most of the city was closed, and the people who weren't closed were spending time with their families. Lena ran her fingers over a cashmere sweater in deep green, soft as a whisper, and tried to decide whether she should be grateful or terrified. She chose jeans and a simple black top, something that felt like her even if the labels inside said otherwise. A bathroom connected to the bedroom, all marble and glass and fixtures that gleamed like they were cleaned daily. And she showered in water that came out at the perfect temperature without her having to adjust anything. By the time she emerged, dressed and feeling almost human again, it was nearly noon. Lena wandered through the house, following hallways that all looked the same until they didn't, passing rooms whose purposes she could only guess at. A library with walls of books that reached to the ceiling. A sitting room done in cream and gold. Another dining room, smaller than the one where she'd eaten last night, but no less elegant. She found her way back to the main foyer and stood there, uncertain, when a voice spoke from behind her. "Miss Hart, Mr. DeLuca is in his office. He asked me to bring you when you were ready." Lena turned to find Tony, the same man who'd been at the door last night. In daylight, he looked even more imposing, broad-shouldered and watchful, with the kind of stillness that suggested violence held carefully in check. "Lead the way," she said. Because what else was there to say? Tony took her through another maze of hallways to a door that was heavier than the others, solid wood reinforced with something she suspected was steel. He knocked twice, waited for a response she couldn't hear, then opened it and gestured for her to enter. Marco's office was exactly what she'd expected. Dark wood, leather furniture, windows that overlooked the grounds, and a desk that looked like it had been built to intimidate. But what caught her attention wasn't the furniture or the artwork or the shelves lined with books in languages she didn't recognize. It was the men in the room with Marco. There were 3 of them, all dressed in suits that didn't quite hide the shapes of weapons underneath. They stood while Marco sat, their postures respectful but not servile, like soldiers waiting for orders from a general they actually believed in. Marco looked up when she entered, and something shifted in his expression, the hard edges softening just slightly, the focus narrowing from whatever business he'd been conducting to her. "Gentlemen," he said without looking away from Lena, "we'll continue this later." The three men filed out without a word, though Lena caught the curious glances they threw her way. Tony closed the door behind them, and suddenly she was alone with Marco in a room that felt both too large and too small at the same time. "Sleep well?" Marco asked, standing and coming around the desk. "Better than I expected, considering." Lena stayed where she was, near the door, maintaining distance even though part of her wanted to close it. "Marie said you were in a meeting. I didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't. I was finishing up." He stopped a few feet away, giving her space, his hands in his pockets in a gesture that was probably meant to look casual but only emphasized how controlled everything about him was. "How are you feeling?" "Confused, overwhelmed, not sure if this is real or if I'm going to wake up in my apartment and discover I drank way too much and imagined the whole thing." Marco's mouth quirked. "It's real, Lena. I promise you that." "That's what I'm afraid of." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the house. "I don't know what I'm doing here, Marco. I don't know what last night was, or what you expect from me, or whether I should be running as fast as I can in the opposite direction. Do you want to run?" "I don't know." The honesty felt like stripping off armor. "Part of me does, the smart part. The part that spent 30 years making safe choices and avoiding risks, and building a life that looked perfect on paper even if it felt empty. And the other part?" Lena met his eyes. "The other part wants to know what happens if I stay." Marco crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and took her hands in his. His grip was warm, solid, real in a way that made her chest ache. "I'm going to tell you something," he said quietly, "and I need you to listen carefully because I'm only going to say it once." Lena nodded, her heart beating faster. "I'm not a good man, Lena. I don't pretend to be. The things I do, the life I live, it's not clean. It's not legal in any way that matters. I have enemies who would use you against me if they knew you existed. I have responsibilities that don't pause for holidays or relationships or anything else." His thumbs brushed across her knuckles. "But I'm honest. I don't lie about who I am or what I want, and I protect what's mine with everything I have." "I'm not yours," Lena said, but her voice was weak. "Not yet." Marco's eyes were dark and intense and absolutely certain. "But you could be, if you wanted, if you were brave enough to choose something real over something safe." "You're asking me to choose you." It wasn't a question. "I'm asking you to choose yourself." He released one of her hands to cup her face, tilting her chin up. "Choose what you want instead of what you think you should want. Choose honesty over comfort. Choose a life that's yours instead of one someone else built for you. And if what I want is you, then you get all of me, the good and the bad, the danger and the protection, a life that will never be normal or safe or anything like what you had before." He paused. "But it will be real, Lena. I promise you that. No pretending, no lying. No waking up one day to discover the person you love has been planning their exit for months." The reference to Derek was deliberate, and it hit exactly where Marco intended. Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I barely know you," she whispered. "Then get to know me. Stay. Ask your questions. See how this feels when it's not wrapped up in the drama of last night." His hand slid into her hair. "I'm not asking you to decide your whole life right now. I'm just asking you to stay for lunch." It was such a small thing, such an easy request. Just lunch, just a meal, just a few more hours in a world that felt like something out of a movie instead of her real life. But Lena knew it wasn't that simple. Knew that every moment she spent here, every conversation they had, every touch she allowed was another thread binding her to a man who'd been completely honest about the fact that his life was built on foundations she didn't fully understand and probably shouldn't approve of. "Okay," she said. "Lunch." Marco smiled, and it transformed his face from dangerous to devastating. "Good, come on, I want to show you something." He led her out of the office and through the house to a set of French doors that opened onto a terrace overlooking the grounds. The snow from last night had turned everything white and pristine, untouched except for a few bird tracks near the fountain. "It's beautiful," Lena said softly. "It's quiet." Marco stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "That's what I liked about it when I bought the property. In the city, you're never alone. Never away from the noise and the people and the constant press of everyone else's needs. But here," he gestured to the expanse of white, "here I can think." "What do you think about?" "Strategy, risk, how to keep the people who depend on me safe while keeping the people who want to destroy me at a distance." He glanced at her. "Lately, I think about you." Lena's breath caught. "Marco, I know it's fast, I know it doesn't make sense, but I've spent my entire life reading people, Lena, knowing who to trust and who to eliminate and who's going to betray me before they even know it themselves." He turned to face her fully. "And when I saw you in that bar last night, I knew. I knew you were different. Knew you were real in a way most people aren't. Knew that if I let you walk away, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to ask you to stay. That's insane." "Probably." His hand found hers again. "But I've built an empire on trusting my instincts. And my instincts are telling me that you walking into that bar last night was the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time." Lena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him this was too fast, too much, too dangerous, wanted to be the responsible adult who made smart choices and thought things through and didn't jump into relationships with men who casually mentioned eliminating threats like they were discussing the weather. But standing there on the terrace, his hand warm around hers, the winter sun turning the snow into diamonds, she couldn't find the words. "Tell me about your life," Marco said suddenly. "Not the version you told your fiancé or your friends, the real version. What did you want before you started wanting what other people expected from you?" The question caught her off guard. Lena stared out at the pristine lawn and tried to remember who she'd been before she'd learned to shape herself around other people's needs. "I wanted to write," she said finally. "Stories, not marketing copy or brand messaging or social media campaigns, real stories that made people feel something." "Why didn't you?" "Because it wasn't practical. Because my parents wanted me to have a stable career and a good salary and benefits that would carry me into retirement." She laughed bitterly. "Because I was scared I wouldn't be good enough. And it was easier to be good at something safe than risk failing at something I actually cared about." "Do you still want to write?" "I don't know. Maybe. I haven't let myself think about it in years." Marco was quiet for a moment, watching her with that intense focus that made her feel like the only person in the world who mattered to him. "My father told me something when I was young," he said finally. "He said that fear is useful when it keeps you alive, but poisonous when it keeps you from living. Most people never figure out the difference." "And you did?" "I had to. In my world, hesitation gets you killed." He squeezed her hand gently. "But it's not just about survival, Lena. It's about not wasting the time you have building a life you don't actually want because you're too afraid to risk failing at the one you do." "Is that what you think I did?" "I think you did what most people do. You found a path that looked safe, and you followed it, even when it stopped feeling right, because turning back felt worse than pushing forward." He turned her to face him. "But you're not on that path anymore. Derek ended it. So now you get to choose a new one. And you think that path should lead to you. I think it should lead to wherever makes you feel most alive." His eyes searched hers. "If that's me, then yes. If it's not, then I'll accept that. But I need you to be honest about it. Not what you think you should feel, what you actually feel." Lena closed her eyes, trying to sort through the chaos of emotions tangling in her chest. Fear, definitely. Uncertainty. Confusion about what was happening and why she wasn't running from it the way every reasonable person would. But underneath all of that, there was something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. "I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff," she said quietly. "And you're asking me to jump without knowing if there's water or rocks at the bottom. I'm asking you to trust that I'll catch you." Marco's voice was low and certain. "And I will, Lena. I promise you that. Whatever happens, whatever you decide, you won't fall alone." She opened her eyes and found him watching her with an expression that was equal parts patience and intensity. Waiting for her answer. Willing to accept whatever she chose, but hoping desperately that she'd choose him. Lena had spent 3 years with a man who'd never looked at her like that, who'd never promised to catch her or protect her or stand beside her through anything difficult. Derek had wanted a partner who made his life easier, not one who challenged him or needed him, or demanded that he show up fully instead of just going through the motions. Marco was offering something completely different, something terrifying and real and honest in a way she'd convinced herself didn't actually exist. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll jump." Marco's smile was slow and full of relief and something that looked almost like reverence. Then he kissed her, soft and careful, and completely different from last night's demanding intensity. This was a promise, a beginning, a recognition that something significant was starting between them, even if neither of them fully understood it yet. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Marco rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" "For being brave enough to take a chance on something that scares you." Lena laughed shakily. "I'm terrified." "Good. That means it matters." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "Now come have lunch with me and ask me all the questions I can see building up behind your eyes. I promised you honesty. Let's see if you can handle it." They ate in the smaller dining room, just the two of them, served by Marie, who appeared and disappeared like a ghost. The food was excellent, but Lena barely tasted it. She was too focused on Marco, on the answers he gave to questions she'd been building up since last night. "What exactly do you do?" she asked over the salad course. Marco set down his fork and met her eyes with that characteristic directness. "I run an organization that provides protection and services to people who can't or won't use traditional legal channels. I have legitimate businesses, restaurants, real estate, construction, that generate income and provide employment. But I also have operations that exist in the gray areas between legal and illegal." "You're in the mafia." That's a simplistic term for a complex structure, but essentially, yes. He didn't flinch from it, didn't try to pretty it up. "My family has been part of this world for 4 generations. I inherited responsibilities and loyalties when my father died, and I've built on what he left me." "Do you hurt people?" "Yes." The answer was immediate and unflinching. "When they threaten what's mine or break agreements that keep a fragile peace intact, I hurt them. Sometimes I kill them. Not personally anymore. I have people for that, but I give the orders and I accept the responsibility for what happens next." Lena's hands were shaking. She set down her own fork before she dropped it. "And you're just telling me this, like it's normal." "It's honest." Marco's voice was calm, patient. "You asked. I promise not to lie to you. This is who I am, Lena. This is the life I live. If you can't accept that, I need to know now." "Why?" The word came out sharper than she intended. "Why would you think I could accept this? I'm a marketing executive from Connecticut. I've never even gotten a speeding ticket, and you're sitting here telling me you order people killed like you're discussing a business merger. Because despite all of that, you're still sitting here." Marco leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You could have left this morning, could have called a car, gone to a hotel, put as much distance between us as possible, but you didn't. You stayed. You came to my office. You agreed to lunch. And now you're asking questions instead of running." He paused. "That tells me you're stronger than you think you are. Or it tells me I'm an idiot who's letting attraction cloud her judgment." "Maybe." His mouth quirked. "Or maybe you recognize something real when you see it, and you're tired of settling for something fake just because it's safer." Lena pushed back from the table and stood, needing to move, needing space to think. She walked to the window and stared out at the grounds, her arms wrapped around herself. "I don't know how to process this," she said quietly. "Everything you're telling me goes against everything I was raised to believe. But you're right, I am still here, and I don't know if that makes me brave or reckless, or just so broken from last night that I've stopped caring about the consequences." She heard Marco stand and cross the room behind her, felt him stop just close enough that she could sense his presence without him touching her. "You're not broken, Lena. You're just finally being honest with yourself about what you want instead of what you think you should want." "And what do I want?" She turned to face him. "According to you, since apparently you can read me better than I can read myself. You want someone who sees you, really sees you, not just the version you present to the world. You want honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. You want to matter to someone in a way that's not conditional on you being easy or convenient or whatever your ex-fiancé needed you to be. Marco took a step closer. And you want to stop apologizing for taking up space in your own life. The accuracy of it stole her breath. That's terrifying, Lena whispered. I know. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. But it's also true. And we can work with true. We can build something on true. What we can't work with is pretending, and I think you've had enough of that to last a lifetime. Lena closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, despite every rational thought screaming that she should pull away. What happens now? Now you decide. Stay or go. Take a chance on this or walk away. Either choice is valid, Lena. But whichever you choose it because it's what you want, not because you're scared. She opened her eyes and found him watching her with patience and intensity in equal measure, waiting for her answer, willing to accept whatever she decided, but hoping she could see it in his eyes, hoping she'd choose to stay. And Lena realized that somewhere between last night and this moment, between the bar and the car, and the kiss that had felt like jumping off a cliff, she'd already made her choice. Now she just had to be brave enough to say it out loud. I want to stay, she said. Not forever, not yet. But I want to see where this goes. I want to know who I could be if I stopped playing it safe and started taking risks that actually matter. The relief that crossed Marco's face was so profound it made her chest ache. Then stay, he said simply. Stay and let me show you what it's like to be with someone who chooses you every single day. Not because you make his life easier, but because he can't imagine his life without you in it. You barely know me. Then we'll get to know each other. His other hand found her waist, pulling her closer. We have time, Lena, and I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. Lena let herself be pulled into his arms, let herself feel the solid warmth of him, let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe choosing danger over safety didn't have to mean choosing destruction. Maybe it could mean choosing truth instead, choosing honesty, choosing a life that was messy and complicated and real, instead of perfect and hollow and built on lies. I'm scared, she admitted against his chest. Good. Marco's arms tightened around her. That means you're paying attention. But I've got you, Lena. I promise. You won't fall alone. And standing there in his arms, in a house that belonged to a world she didn't fully understand, surrounded by a life she'd never imagined for herself, Lena discovered that sometimes the scariest choice was also the most honest one. She chose to stay. 3 weeks passed in a blur of discovery and adjustment that left Lena feeling like she'd stepped into someone else's life and forgotten to step back out. She learned the rhythms of Marco's world quickly because survival demanded it. Mornings meant coffee in the sunroom while Marco took calls in 3 different languages, his voice switching from English to Italian to something she thought might be Russian without missing a beat. Afternoons belonged to the legitimate businesses, meetings with contractors, reviews of restaurant financials, decisions about property acquisitions that all seemed above board until she paid attention to who was being paid and why. Evenings were hers, mostly, Marco carving out time like it was precious because to him it apparently was. And nights were when Lena discovered that falling for someone dangerous felt nothing like falling for someone safe. She'd moved her things from Derek's apartment in a single afternoon, Marie coordinating movers who handled everything with military efficiency while Lena stood in the middle of the Tribeca loft and felt absolutely nothing. No sadness, no regret, just a hollow recognition that she'd spent 2 years living in a space that had never actually been hers. Derek hadn't even been there. He'd texted asking if she wanted to talk, and she'd replied with a single word, no, and that had been the end of it. Her sister called 4 times before Lena finally answered. Are you insane? Rachel's voice came through sharp with worry and frustration in equal measure. You move in with some guy you met in a bar 3 days after Derek? Lena, what are you thinking? I'm thinking I spent 3 years being careful and ended up with nothing. Lena was standing in Marco's library, surrounded by books in languages she couldn't read, and she felt more at home than she ever had in Derek's carefully curated space. I'm thinking maybe careful isn't working for me. So you're going to be reckless instead? That's the alternative? Maybe reckless is just honest without apologizing for it. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, Then softer, she said, "He could be dangerous, Lena. You don't know this man. You don't know what he does or who he is, or I know exactly who he is." Lena cut her off gently but firmly. "He's been completely honest with me about everything, which is more than I can say for Derek, who lied to my face for 4 months while planning his exit strategy." "That doesn't mean—" Rachel stopped herself, and Lena could practically hear her regrouping. "Just promise me you're being safe, that you're not so desperate to prove Derek wrong that you're making decisions that could hurt you." "I promise." Lena meant it, even if safe meant something different now than it had 3 weeks ago. "I'm okay, Rach. Actually, I'm better than okay. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living my actual life instead of performing someone else's version of it." They talked for a few more minutes, Rachel extracting promises that Lena would check in regularly and come visit soon, and when they finally hung up, Lena felt the familiar weight of other people's expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Her sister meant well. Everyone meant well. But they were all operating from the assumption that the life she'd had before was the life she should want. And Lena was finally starting to understand that wanting something different didn't make her broken or reckless or wrong. It just made her honest. "Your sister worried about you?" Marco's voice came from the doorway. Lena turned to find him leaning against the frame, still in the dark suit he'd worn to whatever meeting had occupied his afternoon. His tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up in a way that did absolutely unfair things to her concentration. "She thinks I'm making terrible decisions." "Are you?" Lena considered that, really considered it. Then she crossed the room and wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling him solid and real and completely present in a way Derek never had been. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said against his chest. Marco's arms came around her, pulling her closer. "I can work with that timeline." They settled into something that felt almost normal, if normal meant armed guards at the gates and weekly meetings with men who looked like they'd done time and dinner conversations about territorial disputes that sounded like they belonged in a history book instead of modern-day New York. Lena watched and learned and kept her mouth shut when Marco's inner circle was around, understanding instinctively that trust had to be earned in this world, and she hadn't earned it yet. But she was learning the hierarchy, the protocols, the unspoken rules that governed everything from how people addressed Marco to where they stood in a room. Learning that violence was always an option, but rarely the first one, that reputation mattered more than actual force most of the time, that the truly dangerous men were the ones who stayed calm while everyone else panicked. Men like Marco. "You're staring," he said one night over dinner, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "I'm studying," Lena corrected. "There's a difference." "What are you studying?" "You. How you operate. The way people respond to you." She set down her fork. "Everyone's afraid of you, but it's not the kind of fear that comes from thinking you'll hurt them. It's more like respect mixed with certainty that you could hurt them if you wanted to, but you probably won't unless they give you a reason." Marco's expression shifted to something that looked almost like approval. "You're more observant than I expected." "Is that a compliment?" "It's a fact. Most people don't pay attention to the dynamics in a room. They're too busy managing their own reactions to notice anyone else's." He leaned back in his chair, studying her the same way she'd been studying him. "But you see it. The power structures, the alliances, who's loyal and who's just pretending." "It's not that different from corporate politics," Lena said. "Just higher stakes and more honest about the consequences of betrayal." "Much higher stakes." Marco's voice went quiet, serious. "In your world, betrayal means getting fired or losing a client. In mine, it means people die." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Lena was still learning to process. She'd known from the beginning what Marco was, what his life involved, but knowing intellectually and understanding viscerally were two different things. "Does that bother you?" Marco asked, watching her carefully. "The reality of what I do?" Lena thought about lying, about giving him the answer he might want to hear, but they'd built this thing between them on honesty, and she wasn't about to undermine that foundation now. "Yes," she said simply, "it bothers me that people die because of decisions you make. It bothers me that violence is a tool you use like other people use lawyers or contracts. It bothers me that I'm falling for someone whose hands aren't clean and never will be." Marco's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "And yet you're still here." "And yet I'm still here." Lena met his eyes. Because as much as it bothers me, I can't deny that you've been more honest with me in 3 weeks than Derek was in 3 years. You don't pretend to be something you're not. You don't make promises you can't keep, and you see me, actually see me, in a way no one else ever has. That doesn't excuse what I am, Lena. No, it doesn't, but it does mean something. She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. I'm not asking you to be someone different, Marco. I'm just trying to figure out if I can live with who you actually are. Can you? The question was vulnerable in a way that didn't match the dangerous man asking it, and Lena felt her heart crack open a little wider. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I'm trying, and I need you to be patient with me while I figure it out. Marco turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. I can do patient. What I can't do is watch you pretend this doesn't affect you when it clearly does. I'm not pretending. You're thinking about leaving. It wasn't a question. I can see it in your eyes sometimes, the calculation, whether what we have is worth the cost of what it requires you to accept. He was right, and Lena hated that he could read her so easily. Would you blame me if I did leave? No. The answer was immediate and honest. This life isn't for everyone, Lena. Most people can't handle the moral ambiguity, the constant awareness that everything good comes with a price that someone else pays. If you decide it's too much, I'll accept that. But I need you to be honest about it. Don't stay out of guilt or obligation or because you think you owe me something. Stay because you want to, or don't stay at all. The ultimatum was gentle but unmistakable, and Lena found herself grateful for the clarity. Marco didn't do games or manipulation or passive-aggressive hints about what he needed. He just told her the truth and trusted her to make her own choices. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I'm not ready to leave yet, she said quietly. I'm not ready to give up on this. On us. Then don't. Marco stood and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. Take all the time you need to figure out what you can live with. Just know that while you're figuring it out, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not giving up on you. Lena buried her face in his shoulder and let herself believe him. The first real test came on a Thursday afternoon when Lena was alone in the library trying to focus on a book she'd been meaning to read for years, and failing spectacularly because her mind kept wandering to the conversation she'd overheard that morning between Marco and a man named Sal who ran security. Castellano's making moves, Sal had said, his voice low and urgent. Word is he's looking to make an example. Show he's not afraid of you. Let him look. Marco's response had been calm, almost bored. When he makes his move, we'll be ready. And if he goes after something you care about? There'd been a pause then, heavy with implication, and Lena had held her breath in the hallway where she'd frozen mid-step. Then Castellano will learn that there are some mistakes you don't survive, Marco had said quietly, and something in his tone had sent ice down Lena's spine. Now, sitting in the library with her unread book and her racing thoughts, Lena tried to tell herself it was just business, just the natural tensions between organizations that operated in the same spaces, competed for the same resources, pushed against the same boundaries. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, some confrontation that would force her to confront exactly what it meant to love someone whose enemies didn't just sue or compete, they killed. The library door opened and Tony stepped inside, his expression carefully neutral in a way that immediately put Lena on alert. Miss Hart, Mr. DeLuca asked me to bring you to his office. Is everything okay? Lena set down her book, her heart starting to beat faster. He'll explain. Tony's tone was professional but not unkind. This way, please. Lena followed him through the house, her mind spinning through possibilities. An emergency with the business. A threat. Something about Castellano, whoever that was. By the time they reached Marco's office, she'd worked herself into enough of a state that the sight of him standing calmly by the window actually made her angry. What's wrong? She demanded as soon as Tony closed the door behind her. Marco turned, and something in his expression made her stop short. Not fear, not worry, determination mixed with something that looked almost like regret. We need to talk about your safety, he said without preamble. My safety? Marco, what's going on? He gestured for her to sit, but Lena stayed standing, her arms crossed, waiting. Marco sighed and ran a hand through his hair, the first sign of genuine frustration she'd seen from him in days. There's a situation developing. Someone who's been testing boundaries, seeing how far he can push before I push back. His name is Victor Castellano, and he runs operations in Queens and parts of Brooklyn that border my territory. And what does this have to do with me? You've been seen with me multiple times. People know you're staying here, that you matter to me. Marco's jaw tightened, which makes you a target for anyone who wants to get to me through leverage instead of direct confrontation. The words hit like a physical blow. Lena sank into the chair she'd refused a moment ago, her legs suddenly unsteady. You're saying someone might hurt me to hurt you. I'm saying someone might try. Marco crossed to her, kneeling in front of the chair so they were eye level. And I need you to understand what that means. You can't go anywhere without security. Can't make plans without clearing them with me first. Can't trust anyone you don't know, and can't assume you're safe even when you think you are. You're putting me in a cage. I'm keeping you alive. His voice was sharp, almost harsh. This is the reality, Lena. This is what it means to be with me. I told you there would be danger, but maybe you didn't believe me until now. Lena stared at him, this man she'd chosen over safety and stability, and felt fear crystallize in her chest. Not fear of him, fear for herself, for what she'd walked into, for the consequences of falling in love with someone whose enemies played by rules that had nothing to do with law or morality or basic human decency. I can't live like a prisoner, she whispered. You won't be a prisoner. You'll be protected. Marco took her hands in his. I have the best security money can buy. People who've been with me for years, who I trust with my life. They'll keep you safe, Lena, but you have to let them. And if I don't want that, if I want to go back to my normal life where I can walk down the street without worrying that someone's going to grab me off the sidewalk? Marco's expression went carefully blank. Then you leave. Right now. I'll have someone take you wherever you want to go, set you up with enough money to start over somewhere safe, and we never see each other again. You just let me go? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. I'd hate it. It would feel like losing something I just found, something I didn't even know I was looking for. His hands tightened on hers. But I won't trap you here, Lena. Won't force you to accept a life you don't want just because I want you in it. That's not love. That's possession. And I promised you honesty, not ownership. Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes. 3 weeks ago, she'd had a fiancé and a plan and a future that looked safe and predictable and ultimately meaningless. Now she had a man who offered her truth and protection and a love that came with bodyguards and enemies and the constant awareness that choosing him meant choosing danger. I don't want to leave, she heard herself say. Then don't. But I'm scared, Marco. I'm so scared that I'm making another mistake, choosing another man who's going to hurt me, just in a different way. Marco released her hands and cupped her face instead, forcing her to meet his eyes. I will hurt you, Lena. Not intentionally, but this life guarantees it. You'll worry when I'm late coming home. You'll see things that disturb you. You'll lie awake wondering if the violence I do to protect what's mine makes me a monster you shouldn't love. That's not exactly reassuring. It's honest. His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. But here's what else is honest. I will never lie to you about who I am. Never pretend to be something different to make you comfortable. Never plan an exit while telling you I'm planning a future. When I say I'm all in, I mean it. When I say you're mine, I mean I'll burn down anyone who tries to take you from me. When I say I love you, he stopped, seeming to realize what he'd just said. Lena's breath caught. Do you love me? Yes. The word was simple and absolute. I know it's too soon. I know you're not ready to hear it. But you asked me to be honest, so I'm being honest. I love you, Lena. And if you stay, I'll protect you with everything I have. But you have to want to stay. You have to choose this, eyes open, knowing exactly what it costs. Lena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on her shoulders. Leave and be safe but alone, or stay and be loved but constantly aware of the danger that came with it. Go back to a life she understood or commit to one that terrified her. The smart choice was obvious. The safe choice was clear. But Lena was tired of safe, tired of smart, tired of building a life around fear instead of truth. She opened her eyes and met Marco's gaze, seeing the hope and fear and absolute certainty written across his features. I'm staying, she said, But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll teach me how to protect myself. I won't be helpless, Marco. Won't be just something you guard while you handle the real threats. If I'm going to be in danger because of you, I need to know how to fight back." Something that looked like pride flickered in his eyes. "I can do that. And promise me you'll keep being honest, even when it's hard, even when you think the truth will scare me away. Because the only thing worse than knowing the danger is finding out too late that I didn't know enough to protect myself. I promise." Marco pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat against her chest. "You're braver than you know, Lena Hart. I'm terrified." "I know, but you're staying anyway. That's what brave is." Lena let herself be held, let herself feel the safety of his arms, even as she acknowledged the danger that came with them, and made a choice she knew would change everything. She chose danger over safety, chose truth over comfort, chose love that came with bodyguards and enemies, and the constant awareness that every moment of happiness was borrowed from a world that wanted to take it away. She chose Marco, fully, finally, with her eyes open and her fear acknowledged and her heart completely exposed. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded like her mother whispered that this was a mistake, that she was trading one bad situation for something infinitely worse, that love wasn't supposed to come with armed guards and territorial disputes and men who talked about eliminating threats like they were discussing weather patterns. But another voice, her own voice, the one she'd been ignoring for years, whispered something different. It whispered that real love wasn't safe or comfortable or easy to explain to people who'd never felt it. That choosing someone meant choosing all of them, not just the parts that fit neatly into the life you'd imagined for yourself. That sometimes the scariest thing you could do was also the most honest thing, and honest was the only foundation worth building on. "I love you too," Lena whispered against Marco's chest, the words terrifying and liberating and absolutely true. Marco's arms tightened around her, and she felt him release a breath he'd been holding. "Then we'll figure this out," he said quietly. "Together. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Lena nodded against his shoulder and let herself believe him. She had no idea that whatever came next was already in motion, that Castellano's move was closer than Marco had let on, that within days she'd have to prove that her choice to stay was strong enough to survive the reality of what that choice demanded. But in that moment, wrapped in Marco's arms, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years with Derek, maybe longer. She felt chosen, protected, loved without conditions or expectations or the constant pressure to be someone other than exactly who she was. And whatever the cost of that turned out to be, she was finally ready to pay it. The next morning, Marco woke Lena before dawn. "Come on," he said, already dressed in dark clothing that looked more tactical than his usual suits. "Time for your first lesson." Lena blinked sleep from her eyes, confused until she remembered her demand from yesterday, that he teach her to protect herself, that she wouldn't be helpless in his world. She'd meant it then, standing in his office with fear and determination warring in her chest. But at 5 a.m, with the sky still dark outside, the idea felt significantly less appealing. "Now?" she mumbled. "Now." Marco pulled back the covers without mercy. Threats don't wait for convenient timing, and neither does training. 20 minutes later, Lena found herself in a part of the estate she hadn't explored before. A converted garage that had been transformed into something between a gym and a tactical training facility. Punching bags hung from reinforced beams. Weapons lined one wall in locked cases. Mats covered the floor in sections, and mirrors reflected back her uncertain expression. Tony was already there, along with another man Lena recognized as one of Marco's security team. Both were dressed similarly to Marco, and both looked at her with expressions that were professionally neutral but unmistakably skeptical. "She's serious about this?" Tony asked Marco, not bothering to lower his voice. "She is." Marco's hand settled at the small of Lena's back, a gesture of support and possession in equal measure. "And you're going to train her like you'd train anyone else. No holding back because she's a woman, no going easy because she's mine." Tony's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Your call, boss." The next 2 hours were brutal. Tony put her through basic self-defense moves, teaching her how to break holds, where to strike to cause maximum damage, how to use someone's size and momentum against them. Lena fell more times than she could count, hit the mat so hard her teeth rattled, and discovered muscles she didn't know she had by way of making them scream in protest. But she didn't quit. Every time she went down, she got back up. Every time Tony demonstrated a move that seemed impossible for someone her size to execute against someone his, she tried anyway, and slowly, painfully, she started to understand the mechanics of violence in a way she'd never considered before. It wasn't about being stronger. It was about being smarter, faster, more willing to do whatever it took to survive. Marco watched from the sidelines, his expression unreadable, only stepping in once when Tony threw Lena particularly hard, and she didn't get up immediately. "Enough," Marco said quietly, but with enough authority that Tony stepped back instantly. "I'm fine," Lena gasped, pushing herself to her hands and knees. "Don't stop on my account." Marco crossed to her and crouched down, tilting her face up to examine a bruise already forming on her cheekbone. "You've proven your point. You don't have to break yourself to show me you're serious." "Yes, I do." Lena met his eyes, her own fierce despite the pain radiating through her body. "Because the next time someone comes for me, Tony won't be there to pull his punches, and I need to know I can handle it." Something shifted in Marco's expression, respect mixed with something that looked almost like fear, though Lena couldn't imagine what Marco DeLuca had to be afraid of. "Again," Marco said to Tony, standing and stepping back. They went another hour before Marco finally called it, by which point Lena could barely stand without shaking. But she'd learned the basics of how to fight back, how to target vulnerable points, how to create distance, and buy herself time to escape or for help to arrive. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had yesterday. "Tomorrow, same time," Tony said as he gathered his equipment, "and every day after until this becomes muscle memory. You did good today, Miss Hart. Better than I expected." Coming from Tony, it felt like high praise. Lena nodded her thanks, too exhausted for words. Marco waited until they were alone, then pulled her into his arms with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence of the last few hours. "You didn't have to push yourself that hard," he murmured against her hair. "Yes, I did." Lena's voice was muffled against his chest. "Because I need you to see that I'm not going to break. That I can handle this life, even the ugly parts. I already know you can handle it. You wouldn't still be here if you couldn't." His arms tightened around her. "But watching you take hits, watching you hurt, that's harder than I expected. Welcome to how I feel every time you leave for a meeting that might end in violence." Lena pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "This is what it means to love someone in your world, right? Constant fear mixed with absolute certainty that they can handle themselves?" Marco's mouth quirked despite the seriousness of the conversation. "Something like that." "Then we'll learn together." Lena kissed him softly, tasting salt and determination. "You teach me to fight, and I'll teach myself not to panic every time you're late coming home." "Deal." The training became routine over the next week. Every morning before dawn, Lena met Tony in the converted garage and learned new ways to hurt people who wanted to hurt her. Hand-to-hand combat, weapons basics, situational awareness that taught her to read a room the way Marco did, cataloging exits, identifying threats, understanding the terrain before violence erupted. She learned that Marco's world operated on a strict hierarchy where respect was currency and reputation was armor, that most conflicts were resolved through negotiation and careful displays of power rather than actual bloodshed, that the violence, when it came, was surgical and purposeful, designed to send messages rather than just eliminate problems. She also learned that Castellano was more than just a territorial rival. He was ambitious in a way that made him dangerous, willing to break the unspoken rules that kept the different organizations from destroying each other in favor of profitable coexistence. "He's been pushing for months," Sal explained one evening when Lena joined a meeting she probably wasn't supposed to attend. Marco had given her a look but hadn't asked her to leave, which she took as tacit permission. Testing boundaries, seeing how much he can take before you respond with force instead of warnings. And now? Marco's voice was calm, but Lena had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightening around his eyes that meant he was calculating risk and consequence. Now he's getting bold. Word is he's planning something big, something designed to make you look weak in front of the other families. What kind of something? Sal glanced at Lena, hesitation clear on his weathered face. Marco followed his gaze, then looked back at Sal with an expression that said, "Continue." He's been asking questions about Miss Hart, where she goes, who she sees, when she's alone. Sal's voice went hard. He's planning to use her to get to you. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. When? Marco's voice was very quiet, very controlled, and Lena recognized it as the same tone he'd used when promising that some mistakes didn't survive. Soon. Maybe days. My sources say he's putting a team together, professionals from out of state who don't know enough to be scared of you. Marco stood and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets, his posture casual except for the coiled violence Lena could feel radiating off him even from across the room. Double security on Lena. No one in or out without my direct approval. Tony stays with her at all times, even inside the house. He turned back to face Sal. And send a message to Castellano. Tell him we need to talk, neutral ground, just the two of us. Boss, that's an order, Sal. Sal nodded and left, taking the other men with him. When the door closed, leaving them alone, Lena stood and crossed to where Marco remained by the window. You're going to meet with him, she said. Not a question. I'm going to try to avoid a war. Marco's reflection in the glass looked older than his years, weighted with responsibilities Lena was only beginning to understand. If I can negotiate with Castellano, make him understand that coming after you is a line he doesn't want to cross, maybe we can resolve this without bloodshed. And if he doesn't listen, Marco turned to face her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. Then I'll do what's necessary to protect you. Whatever that requires. Lena reached up to cup his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. The barely controlled fury that came from loving someone while living in a world where that love made them vulnerable. I trust you, she said simply. Whatever you decide, I trust you to handle it. You shouldn't. The words were raw, honest. You should be terrified of what I'm willing to do to keep you safe. I am terrified. Lena's thumb brushed across his cheekbone. But not of you. Never of you. I'm terrified of losing this, losing us, before I've even figured out what we could be. Marco pulled her into his arms, holding her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat, rapid and hard against her chest. I won't let that happen. I swear to you, Lena. Whatever it takes, I'll keep you safe. She believed him. Maybe that made her naive. Maybe it made her foolish. But standing in his arms with the weight of his promise surrounding her, Lena believed that Marco would do exactly what he said. The question was what that would cost him, cost them both. The meeting with Castellano was set for the following evening at a restaurant in Queens that served as neutral territory. Marco spent the day in preparation, calls with allies, arrangements with people Lena didn't know, contingencies for scenarios she didn't want to imagine. I'm coming with you, Lena announced over lunch. Marco looked up from his phone, his expression already forming a refusal. Absolutely not. He wants to use me against you. He's been asking questions about me, planning something that involves me. Lena kept her voice calm, reasonable. Don't you think he should see that I'm not some helpless asset he can leverage? That I know exactly what you are, and I choose to be here anyway? What I think is that bringing you anywhere near Castellano is the worst idea I've heard all week. Marco set down his phone with more force than necessary. He's dangerous, Lena. Unpredictable. And if something goes wrong, then Tony and your security team will handle it, same as they would if I was here. Lena leaned forward. I'm not asking permission, Marco. I'm telling you I'm coming, because hiding me away like some precious object he might steal only reinforces that I'm a weakness he can exploit. But if I'm there, if I show him I'm part of this willingly, it changes the dynamic. Marco stared at her for a long moment, conflict clear in his expression. Then he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. You're going to be the death of me, he said, but there was reluctant admiration in his voice. Fine. But you stay close to me the entire time, you follow Tony's lead if anything goes wrong, and if I tell you to leave, you leave. No arguments. Deal. That evening, Lena dressed carefully in clothes that walked the line between professional and defiant. Dark pants, a fitted blouse, heels that were practical enough to run in if necessary, but elegant enough to show she wasn't intimidated. She studied herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. 4 weeks ago, she'd been a marketing executive who worried about client presentations and quarterly reviews. Now she was preparing to face down a mafia boss who wanted to use her as leverage against the man she loved. The transformation should have terrified her. Instead, it felt almost like coming home. Marco met her at the bottom of the stairs, his expression darkening when he saw what she was wearing. "You look like you're going into battle," he said. "Aren't I?" His mouth quirked despite the tension radiating through his frame. "I suppose you are. Just remember, this isn't your fight, Lena. You don't have to prove anything to Castellano or anyone else." "I'm not trying to prove anything to him." Lena straightened his tie unnecessarily, using the gesture as an excuse to touch him. "I'm proving something to myself. That I can stand beside you in this world instead of hiding behind you." Marco caught her hands, holding them against his chest. "You've already proven that. Every day you stay, every morning you show up for training even though Tony puts you through hell, every time you ask hard questions instead of accepting easy lies, you prove it. Then tonight I prove it to the rest of your world." Lena rose on her toes to kiss him softly. "Let's go show Castellano that I'm not the weakness he thinks I am." The restaurant was exactly what Lena expected. Upscale Italian, the kind of place where the food was secondary to the deals made over wine and veal. They were shown to a private room in the back, Tony and two other guards flanking them, their presence both protection and statement. Castellano was already there. He was younger than Lena expected, maybe 40, handsome in a way that would have been charming if not for the coldness in his eyes. He stood when they entered, his gaze moving from Marco to Lena with an assessment that made her skin crawl. "DeLuca," he said with a slight nod. "And this must be the famous Lena Hart, the woman who's caused such a stir." "Castellano." Marco's voice was flat, controlled. "Let's skip the pleasantries. You wanted to talk, so talk." They sat, Lena beside Marco, acutely aware of the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Tony positioned himself behind them, his hand resting casually near where Lena knew he kept his weapon. Castellano poured wine with practiced ease, sliding glasses across the table. "I admire a man who gets straight to business. So here's my business. You're in my way, DeLuca. Your territory overlaps with mine. Your operations undercut my profits, and your reputation makes it hard for me to expand without looking like I'm afraid of you." "You should be afraid of me," Marco said calmly. "Everyone who's crossed me is either dead or wished they were." "See, that's exactly the problem." Castellano's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That kind of talk, that reputation, it limits what's possible. I'm proposing we restructure our arrangement. You cede certain territories, we split the profits on overlapping operations, and everyone makes more money with less conflict. And if I refuse, then things get messy." Castellano's gaze slid to Lena again. "I'd hate for anyone to get hurt unnecessarily, especially someone as lovely as Miss Hart here. It would be a shame if she got caught in the crossfire of a conflict that didn't need to happen." The threat was unmistakable, and Lena felt Marco go very still beside her. "You just made a serious mistake," Marco said quietly. "Did I?" Castellano leaned back in his chair, all false confidence. "I'm just pointing out reality, DeLuca. You've got a weakness now, something that matters to you more than territory or profit or reputation, and that makes you vulnerable in ways you weren't before." Lena had stayed quiet through the exchange, letting Marco handle the negotiation the way he'd obviously handled hundreds of similar conversations. But Castellano's casual dismissal of her as nothing more than leverage, his assumption that she was a weakness to exploit rather than a person with agency, ignited something sharp and furious in her chest. "I'm sitting right here," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "If you're going to threaten me, at least have the courage to do it to my face instead of talking around me like I'm not in the room." Castellano's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across his features before settling back into condescension. "My apologies, Miss Hart. I didn't realize you were participating in this conversation. I'm participating in everything that involves my life." Lena met his gaze without flinching. "And I'm not the weakness you think I am. I know exactly what Marco is, what his world involves, what being with him means. I chose it anyway. Not because I'm naive or desperate or too stupid to understand the danger, but because I'd rather be with someone honest about who he is than safe with someone who lies about it." "How touching." Castellano's tone was mocking. "Young love conquering all, but love doesn't stop bullets, sweetheart, And it won't protect you when I decide Marco needs a reminder that there are consequences for refusing reasonable offers. Marco moved then, faster than Lena had ever seen him move, leaning across the table with violence radiating from every line of his body. Listen very carefully, Castellano, because I'm only going to say this once. His voice was deadly quiet. You don't threaten her. You don't mention her. You don't even think about her. Because if anything happens to Lena, if she so much as gets a parking ticket that traces back to you, I will dismantle everything you've built piece by piece. I'll destroy your operations, eliminate your allies, and make sure everyone in this city knows that Victor Castellano was stupid enough to cross a line that got him killed slowly. Castellano tried to maintain his composure, but Lena saw the fear flicker in his eyes. This was the Marco that everyone else saw, the dangerous man whose reputation was built on actions, not just threats. You'd start a war over a woman? Castellano asked, attempting dismissiveness but landing somewhere closer to nervousness. I'd end one over her. Marco leaned back, his posture relaxing into something that was somehow more threatening than his earlier intensity. You came here thinking you could use Lena to manipulate me into making bad business decisions. But what you failed to understand is that she's not a weakness. She's the reason I'll show you less mercy than I would have otherwise. Because now it's not just business. It's personal. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Lena watched Castellano calculate his options, saw the moment he realized he'd miscalculated badly, that threatening Marco's woman had been exactly the wrong move. I think we're done here, Marco said, standing. You want to compete with me on territory, on operations, on profit? Fine. That's business. But Lena is off limits, completely. Forever. And if you're smart, you'll make sure every single person in your organization understands that trying to use her against me is signing their own death warrant. He offered Lena his hand, and she took it, standing beside him in a united front that made Castellano's isolation in the room suddenly very obvious. This isn't over, De Luca, Castellano said, but the bravado was gone from his voice. Yes, Marco said quietly, it is. You just don't know it yet. They left the restaurant with Tony and the security team surrounding them, and Lena didn't release the breath she'd been holding until they were in the car, pulling away from the curb. That went well, she said, hysteria bubbling up as laughter. Marco looked at her like she'd lost her mind. That was a disaster. I just threatened a war over... He stopped himself. Over me, Lena finished. You threatened a war over me. Yes, Marco's jaw was tight. Because he made it clear he was willing to hurt you to get to me, and that's not something I can let stand. But now he knows you matter to me, which makes you an even bigger target, and I've escalated a situation that might have been resolved diplomatically into something that will probably end in violence. Good, Lena said fiercely. Marco stared at her. Good? He was going to come after me anyway, Marco. Whether you tried to negotiate or not, whether you threatened him or not, he'd already decided I was leverage he could use. At least now he knows there will be consequences. She turned in her seat to face him fully. And at least now I know you meant what you said, that you'll protect me with everything you have. I told you I would. People say a lot of things, but you were willing to start a war to keep me safe. That's... Her voice cracked. That's not nothing, Marco. He pulled her into his arms, awkward in the confines of the car, but necessary for both of them. You're not nothing, Lena. You're everything, and that terrifies me more than any rival or threat or war ever could, because now I have something to lose that actually matters. Lena held him tighter, understanding finally the full weight of what it meant to be loved by someone like Marco De Luca. It wasn't flowers and poetry and grand romantic gestures. It was the promise of protection, backed by the willingness to destroy anyone who threatened it. It was honesty that didn't flinch from ugly truths. It was choosing her every day, even when that choice came with costs most people would never be willing to pay. We'll figure this out, she whispered against his shoulder. Together. Whatever Castellano does next, we'll handle it. Together, Marco agreed. But even as he said it, even as they held each other in the back seat of an armored car with armed guards watching for threats, Lena felt the shadow of what was coming settling over them. Castellano had been threatened, humiliated, and backed into a corner where saving face meant responding with violence. And she'd just painted a target on her back by being exactly what Marco claimed she was, the thing he couldn't afford to lose. The war Marco had promised might still be avoidable, but only if Castellano was smarter than he seemed, and Lena had a terrible feeling he wasn't. Castellano made his move 3 days later, and it wasn't what anyone expected. Lena was in the library working through edits on a short story she'd started writing, her first attempt at fiction in over 5 years, when Tony appeared in the doorway with an expression that made her blood run cold. "Where's Marco?" she asked, already standing. "Meeting downtown. There's been an incident." Tony's voice was carefully controlled. "One of our warehouses was hit. Fire. Looks like arson. Mr. DeLuca is assessing damage and talking to the fire marshal." "So why are you here looking like someone died?" Tony hesitated, which was worse than any answer he could have given. "Because the warehouse that burned was empty. Just got cleared out 2 days ago, moved everything to a different location. Someone knew it was empty, Miss Hart. Someone set a fire specifically designed to pull Mr. DeLuca away from the estate." Understanding hit like ice water. "It's a distraction." "We think so, yes." Tony was already moving, gesturing for her to follow. "We're going to the safe room until Mr. DeLuca gets back. He's on his way now, but until he's here..." The explosion cut him off. It wasn't close enough to damage the house, but Lena felt it through the floor, heard the deep boom that rattled the windows and set off car alarms somewhere in the distance. Tony had her arm immediately, pulling her toward the hallway, even as his other hand went to his radio. "Report," he barked into it. Static, then a voice Lena recognized as one of the perimeter guards. "East Gate. Vehicle explosive. Gates destroyed, but the wall held. We've got movement in the trees, at least 4, maybe more." Gunfire drowned out the rest. "Safe room now," Tony said, his voice leaving no room for argument. They ran through corridors Lena had walked dozens of times, but everything looked different now, threatening, the familiar spaces transformed into potential kill zones. More guards appeared from other parts of the house, falling into formation around them with military precision. The safe room was in the basement, behind a door that looked like part of the wall, until Tony pressed his palm against a scanner and it slid open with a quiet hiss. Inside was a space about the size of a large bedroom, outfitted with monitors showing camera feeds from around the property, communications equipment, weapons, and supplies that suggested it was designed for extended occupancy if necessary. "Inside," Tony ordered, practically pushing Lena through the door. "What about Marco?" Lena grabbed his arm, panic clawing at her throat. "If Castellano's people are here, if this was all to separate us, Mr. DeLuca can handle himself. My job is to keep you safe." Tony pried her fingers loose, not unkindly. "Please, Miss Hart, don't make this harder than it already is." Lena stepped into the safe room, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Tony started to close the door, then paused. "The training we did," he said quietly. "If it comes to it, remember what I taught you. Vulnerable points. Create distance. Survive long enough for help to arrive." Then the door closed, sealing her into silence broken only by the hum of electronics and her own ragged breathing. Lena moved to the monitors, watching multiple angles of chaos unfolding across the estate. Men in tactical gear were pushing through the damaged East Gate, exchanging fire with Marco's security team. 2 were down already, maybe dead, definitely not moving. The rest were advancing with the kind of precision that spoke to professional training and serious intent. Another monitor showed the driveway, and Lena's stomach dropped when she saw a second vehicle approaching fast, this one heading for the main entrance. They were going to breach the house. She grabbed the radio from the communications console, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. "Tony? Tony, there's another vehicle coming to the front of the house. Do you see it?" Static, then Tony's voice tight with stress. "We see it. Stay in the safe room, Miss Hart. Do not open that door for anyone except Mr. DeLuca or me. Anyone else, you shoot first and ask questions later. Weapons are in the cabinet to your left. Code is your birthday." Lena stared at the cabinet, her mind spinning. She'd trained with handguns, knew the basics of loading and firing and not accidentally shooting herself, but knowing how to do something in Tony's controlled environment was very different from actually doing it when people were trying to kill you. She punched in her birthday with trembling fingers. The cabinet opened to reveal an arsenal that would have been impressive even in a military context. Lena grabbed a handgun that was similar to the one Tony had trained her on, checked that it was loaded the way he'd taught her, and positioned herself behind the desk with a clear line of sight to the door. Then she waited. The monitors showed the second vehicle ramming through the front entrance, the reinforced doors holding for approximately 3 seconds before giving way with a screech of tortured metal. Men poured out, and Lena watched Tony and the other guards engage them in the foyer, the firefight brutal in close quarters and absolutely terrifying. Tony went down. Lena saw it happen on the monitor, saw him take a round to the shoulder that spun him around and dropped him behind a marble pillar. He was still moving, still fighting, but he was hurt and outnumbered, and the attackers were pushing deeper into the house. Toward the basement. Toward her. Lena's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she nearly shot herself fumbling for it. Marco's name on the screen felt like a lifeline. "Where are you?" she gasped into the phone. 5 minutes out." Marco's voice was tight, controlled fury barely contained. "Tony got you to the safe room?" "Yes, but Marco, they're in the house. Tony's down, there are too many of them, they're—" "Listen to me." Marco's voice cut through her panic like a knife. "That door will hold. It's reinforced steel, bomb-proof, designed to withstand exactly this kind of assault. You stay inside, you stay quiet, and you wait for me. I'm coming, Lena. I promise you, I'm coming." "What if you don't get here in time?" "Then you do what Tony trained you to do. You survive. Whatever it takes, you survive until I can get to you." His voice softened just slightly. "I love you. Remember that. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, remember that I love you and I'm coming for you." The line went dead. Lena set the phone down with hands that had stopped shaking, a strange calm settling over her. Fear was still there, terror singing through her veins like electricity, but underneath it was something harder, sharper. The thing she'd been building over weeks of training and hard conversations and choosing to stay in a world that was trying very hard to kill her right now. She wasn't going to die in this basement, wasn't going to let Castellano win by default because she was too scared to fight back. Marco was coming, but until he got here, she was on her own. And she was done being helpless. The monitor showed the attackers clearing rooms methodically, professionally, moving with the coordination of people who'd trained together extensively. They took down 2 more of Marco's guards in the hallway outside the library, and Lena felt rage join the fear in her chest. These were men she'd seen every day, men who'd protected her, who'd nodded respectfully when she passed them in the corridors, who'd taken bullets for her without hesitation. The attackers reached the basement stairs. There were 4 of them, all armed with weapons that looked military-grade and absolutely illegal. They moved down the stairs in formation, covering each other's angles, and Lena knew with cold certainty that the safe room door wouldn't stay closed if they had the right equipment. She was right. They attached something to the doorframe. Lena couldn't see exactly what from the interior monitor, and then retreated back up the stairs. 5 seconds later, the explosion was muffled, but powerful enough to make Lena's ears ring and her eyes water from the sudden influx of smoke. The door didn't open, but a crack appeared along one edge, and that was enough. One of the attackers wedged something into the crack, a pry bar maybe, or something designed specifically for this purpose, and started levering it wider. The door groaned, protested, and slowly began to give way. Lena raised the gun, her hand steady now, her breathing controlled the way Tony had taught her. Center mass, 2 shots, move to the next target. Don't think about them as people, just threats to be neutralized. Survive long enough for help to arrive. The door came open with a shriek of tortured metal. The first man through died instantly, Lena's 2 shots catching him exactly where Tony had taught her to aim. He went down hard, and the attackers behind him scattered, surprised to meet resistance when they'd probably expected her cowering in a corner. Lena moved behind the desk, using it for cover as they returned fire. Bullets tore through wood and monitors and the wall behind her, but she stayed low, stayed calm, waited for an opening. The second man tried to flank her, coming around the desk from the left. Lena shot him in the knee first, vulnerable point, create distance, and then twice more when he went down. The training took over, muscle memory and survival instinct overriding the part of her brain that wanted to freeze or panic or acknowledge what she was actually doing. 2 down, 2 still up. "She killed Marcus," one of them shouted, genuine shock in his voice. "The woman killed Marcus." Good, Lena thought with vicious satisfaction. Let them be shocked, let them hesitate. Every second they spent being surprised was a second closer to Marco arriving. But they were professionals, and professionals adapted quickly. The remaining 2 separated, trying to pin her between them, laying down covering fire that forced Lena to stay behind the desk. She was running out of ammunition. Tony had taught her to count her shots, and she'd fired 8 times already with only a few rounds left in the magazine. She needed to reload, needed to move, needed to do something before they got close enough that her limited training wouldn't be enough. That's when she heard it. Gunfire from upstairs, different from before. Heavier, more controlled, and coming from the direction of the main entrance. Marco. The attackers heard it too, their momentary hesitation all the confirmation Lena needed. One of them grabbed his radio, said something sharp in a language Lena didn't recognize, and the response that came back made both men curse. They were trapped. Marco was in the house, cutting off their retreat, and they'd just wasted precious time trying to get to Lena instead of escaping when they had the chance. One of them made a decision. He stood up from behind the overturned cabinet where he'd taken cover and raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Lena with the clear intention of finishing what they'd come here to do before dying in the attempt. Lena shot him 3 times. The last attacker dropped his weapon and raised his hands, survival instinct overriding whatever loyalty or payment had brought him here. Lena kept her gun trained on him, her hands rock steady now, adrenaline and fury and absolute certainty making her aim unwavering. "On your knees," she said, her voice not sounding like her own. "Hands behind your head. If you move, I will kill you." He complied, terror clear in his eyes, and Lena felt a savage satisfaction that this man who'd come to kidnap or kill her was now afraid of her. Footsteps thundered on the basement stairs. Lena didn't turn, didn't take her eyes off her prisoner, but she recognized the cadence, the weight, the particular way Marco moved even when running. "Lena!" His voice was ragged, desperate. "I'm okay," she called back. "I'm okay, but don't come in fast. I've got one of them at gunpoint and I'm a little trigger happy right now." Marco appeared in the doorway, and the expression on his face when he saw her, alive, armed, standing over 3 bodies with a 4th man on his knees, was something Lena would remember for the rest of her life. Relief and pride and fury and love all mixed together into something so intense it was almost painful to witness. "I'm okay," she said again, softer this time. Marco crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, the gun still in her hand pressed between them, his heart racing against her chest. "You're okay," he repeated like he was trying to convince himself. "You're alive. You're okay. You—" He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands framing it like he needed to touch her to believe she was real. "You killed 3 of them. 4, actually. I got one in the foyer before they pushed through, and I've got this one ready for you to question." Lena gestured to the kneeling man without taking her eyes off Marco. "Tony taught me well. Tony's going to live. Shoulder wound clean through, already demanding to come down here." Marco's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and his hand came away smeared with blood that Lena hadn't realized was there. "But you're bleeding." "Not my blood." The word should have been horrifying, should have made her sick with the recognition of what she'd done, but all Lena felt was tired, bone deep, exhausted, but still standing. "Is it over?" "It's over." Marco's voice went hard. "Castellano's dead. I went straight to him as soon as I realized this was his move. He died badly, Lena, slowly, and everyone who worked for him knows exactly why." Lena should have been shocked, should have been disturbed that Marco had killed someone in the time it took to drive from downtown to the estate. But she couldn't find it in herself to care that Castellano was dead, not when his people had just tried to kill her and everyone she'd come to care about in Marco's world. "Good," she said simply. Marco's eyes searched hers, looking for signs of trauma or breakdown or regret, but Lena met his gaze steadily. She'd killed people tonight, had taken lives to preserve her own, had pulled the trigger without hesitation because hesitation meant dying. And while she'd process that eventually, while there would probably be nightmares and moments of doubt and conversations with therapists who specialized in trauma, right now all she felt was grateful to be alive. "What do you want me to do with this one?" Marco asked, gesturing to the kneeling attacker without looking away from Lena. "That's your decision, not mine." Lena finally lowered the gun, her arms shaking now with delayed reaction. "But I want him to know that I'm not afraid of him. Not afraid of anyone Castellano sent. Not afraid of this life anymore." Marco called something in Italian, and 2 of his men appeared to haul the prisoner away. Then he took the gun from Lena's hand, set it carefully on the desk, and pulled her back into his arms. "I'm so sorry," he murmured against her hair. "I should have seen this coming, should have anticipated that he'd try something this bold, should have—" "Stop." Lena pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "You warned me. You told me this life came with danger, that being with you meant being a target. I chose to stay anyway, and when it mattered, I survived. We both did. You did more than survive. You fought back. Killed trained professionals who probably never expected resistance from someone they thought was just what? Just a weakness? Just leverage?" Lena's laugh was shaky but genuine. "I told Castellano I wasn't what he thought I was. Tonight I proved it." Marco kissed her then, hard and desperate, and full of everything they'd both been too afraid to lose. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lena tasted blood and smoke and the metallic tang of adrenaline still singing through her veins. "I love you," Marco said fiercely. "And I swear to you, this is the last time anyone threatens you because of me. Castellano's death sends a message that you're not just protected, you're untouchable. Anyone who even thinks about using you against me will remember what happened tonight." "I love you too." Lena rested her forehead against his. "And I'm not going anywhere, not after tonight, not after proving that I can handle this world. I choose you, Marco. I choose this life, all of it, including the ugly parts." They stood there in the wreckage of the safe room, surrounded by bodies and bullet holes, and the evidence of violence survived, and Lena felt something settle in her chest. This was her life now, not the safe, predictable existence she'd built with Derek, not the hollow performance of normalcy that had left her feeling invisible and undervalued. This was real and dangerous and absolutely honest, and she'd just proven she was strong enough to claim it. The next few hours were controlled chaos. Police arrived, but they were clearly on Marco's payroll because the questions were perfunctory, and the official story, home invasion, self-defense, unfortunate loss of life, was accepted without much scrutiny. EMTs treated Tony and 2 other injured guards, while Marco coordinated cleanup with an efficiency that spoke to experience with exactly this kind of situation. Lena sat in the library, wrapped in a blanket someone had brought her, and watched it all happen with a strange detachment. She'd killed 4 people tonight, had ended lives to preserve her own, had pulled the trigger again and again without hesitation because survival demanded it. Eventually, that would hit her. Eventually, she'd have to reckon with what she'd done and who she'd become. But not tonight. Tonight she was alive, and Marco was alive, and they'd survived something that was supposed to destroy them. Dawn was breaking when things finally settled enough for Marco to collapse beside her on the library sofa, exhaustion written across every line of his face. "How are you really?" he asked quietly. Lena considered the question, taking inventory of her body and mind and the strange calm that had settled over her. "I'm okay," she said, and meant it. "I'm going to have nightmares. I'm going to need to talk to someone about what happened. I'm going to have moments where I can't believe I actually did what I did." She turned to look at him. "But I'm okay. Because I survived. Because you survived. Because we're both here and Castellano isn't. And that means we won." Marco pulled her into his arms, and Lena let herself be held, let herself feel safe in a way she'd earned rather than been given. "What happens now?" she asked against his chest. "Now we rebuild. The east gate, the front entrance, the damaged parts of the house. Now I make absolutely certain that every organization in the city knows what happens when someone threatens what's mine. Now we figure out what kind of life we want to build together, knowing that we've both seen the worst of each other's worlds and chosen to stay anyway." "I want to write," Lena said suddenly. "Not marketing copy or brand messaging. Real stories. Fiction that matters, that makes people feel something. And I want to do it from here, with you, in this house where I learned what it means to be strong." Marco pulled back to look at her, something like wonder in his expression. "Then you'll write. Whatever you need. Time, space, resources. It's yours." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He kissed her softly. "You've earned the right to choose your own path, Lena. You've proven you can survive in my world. Now prove you can thrive in it." The weeks that followed were adjustment and healing in equal measure. Tony recovered, though he walked with a slight limp now and made absolutely certain Lena knew that he was proud of her for remembering her training. The house was repaired, Security upgraded to levels that made it nearly impossible for anyone to attempt what Castellano had tried. And slowly, carefully, Lena integrated fully into Marco's world. She attended meetings now, not just as Marco's woman, but as someone whose opinion mattered, whose survival of Castellano's attack had earned her respect from men who'd initially seen her as nothing more than a liability. She trained with Tony every morning still, but now it was about maintaining skills rather than building them from scratch. And she wrote stories about complicated women making hard choices, about love that came with costs and demanded courage, about finding strength in unexpected places. 3 months after that terrible night in the safe room, Marco's inner circle gathered for a dinner that was equal parts business meeting and family celebration. Lena sat at Marco's right hand wearing a dress she'd chosen herself rather than something he'd provided, and listened as Sal reported on operations and territories and profits that all seemed to be thriving in Castellano's absence. "One more thing," Sal said, glancing at Lena with an expression that was almost embarrassed. "The other families have been asking questions about Miss Hart, about what her position is in the organization." "My position?" Lena looked at Marco, confused. Marco's mouth quirked. "They want to know if you're just my girlfriend or something more official. In this world, titles matter. Definitions matter. And after what happened with Castellano, after you proved you could defend yourself in this family, people want clarity about where you stand." Lena understood then what he was really asking, not about titles or official positions, but about commitment, about whether she was ready to be recognized as truly part of his world rather than just passing through it. She thought about Derek, about the engagement that had meant nothing because it was built on lies and expectations and a future she'd never actually wanted. Thought about the woman she'd been on Christmas Eve, walking out of that restaurant with nowhere to go and no idea who she was without someone else defining her. She wasn't that woman anymore. "I stand with Marco," Lena said clearly, looking around the table at men who'd bled for her, fought beside her, and accepted her into a world that didn't usually make space for outsiders. "Whatever that means officially, whatever title that requires, I'm his, completely. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." The men around the table smiled, respect clear in their expressions. Sal nodded like she'd passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. "Welcome to the family, Miss Hart," he said simply. Later, when the dinner had ended and the guests had left and they were alone in the library where Lena spent most of her time now, Marco pulled a small box from his pocket. "I know it's fast," he said, opening it to reveal a ring that was simple and elegant and absolutely perfect. "I know we've only been together a few months, and I know you've got every reason to be cautious about making this kind of commitment after what happened with your ex. But I also know that you're brave enough to choose what you want instead of what's safe, and I'm hoping what you want is me, permanently." Lena stared at the ring, her heart pounding. This wasn't like Derek's proposal, carefully timed and executed over expensive wine with a carefully chosen ring that fit someone else's vision of who she should be. This was Marco, honest and direct, and offering her a life that would never be normal, but would always be real. "Yes," she said, and watched relief transform his face into something beautiful. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly because of course it did. Marco paid attention, always had, always would. "I love you, Lena Hart." Marco pulled her into his arms. "And I promise you, every single day for the rest of our lives, I'll choose you the same way you chose me. No lies, no pretending, no building a future on anything but absolute truth." "I love you too." Lena kissed him, tasting certainty and commitment and the promise of a life she'd build on her own terms. "And I choose you, today and every day after, for better or worse, in this world we've made together." Standing in his arms with the weight of the ring on her finger and the memories of how far she'd come burning bright in her chest, Lena understood finally what it meant to be chosen and to choose in return. It wasn't safe, and it wasn't easy, and it came with costs that most people would never be willing to pay. But it was real. It was honest. It was a life she'd claimed through courage and sacrifice, and the willingness to fight for what mattered. And as Marco held her close, the city lights glittering through the windows of a house that had become her fortress and her home, Lena knew with absolute certainty that her ruined Christmas Eve had led her exactly where she was supposed to be. Not to safety, not to comfort, Not to the hollow performance of a perfect life that would have slowly killed everything authentic about her, but to truth. To love that demanded everything and gave back even more. To a man who saw her completely and chose her anyway, who protected her fiercely and trusted her absolutely, who'd promised to catch her if she jumped and had kept that promise every single day. The future ahead was dangerous and unpredictable and absolutely impossible to control. But it was theirs, built on honesty and tested by fire and proven strong enough to survive anything the world threw at it. And that was more than enough. That was everything.